they've separated out stuff. So figure 19.1 on page 302 is just showing the connective tissue layers on the outside of the spinal cord. That's going to be on our cross-section of the spinal cord model. And unfortunately, they don't label the inside of the spinal cord until another picture. So it's separated out. So figure 19.1 and 19.3 are going to be your complete picture that would all be on one model. There's nothing to cross out in 19.1. 19.2 is the long version of the spinal cord, and we do have our green guy model. I like the green one versus the white one because you can see the stuff more efficiently. So we'll point to that on there. Pictures B, C, and D are all dead people's spinal cords. We don't care about the book's dead people's. We care about our little dead guy up there. So you can ignore B, C, and D. And then picture A, there's nothing to cross out. It's pretty straightforward. Figure 19.3, again, it's picking up where 19.1 left off. So you've got the different levels of connective tissue on the outside, dura mater, arachnoid mater, pia mater. And then we're going to have the parts of the spinal cord. Now, as we look at figure 19.3, one, on the free edge where it has the white columns and it says dorsal funiculus, ventral funiculus, lateral funiculus, cross out the word funiculus because that's a weird word and write in column. Column is so much easier to remember than funiculus.
So dorsal, ventral, lateral, funiculus? Okay.
Yep. Anywhere it says funiculus, write column instead. Makes life easier. Okay. And as we mentioned in class, with your lab book, it likes to just use dorsal and ventral. So it uses it across the board. So, of course, dorsal gray horns, blah, blah, blah. Where I and some of the other authors out there, they'll use the terms dorsal and ventral for the peripheral nervous system. So the dorsal root ganglia, ventral root. And they'll use anterior, posterior for the spinal cord proper. Even though they are interchangeable, that change in term kind of helps you to set the difference between the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So I say posterior gray horn, where your book would have dorsal gray horn. And I would say anterior gray horn, where your book would say ventral gray horn. So if you write dorsal and my answer key says posterior, you'd still get credit because dorsal and ventral are interchangeable. Dorsal and posterior interchangeable. Anterior ventral are interchangeable. So kind of keep that in mind, not to be confused by. Your book just uses dorsal ventral exclusively, where I'm going to say posterior anterior for the central nervous system structures, and I'll say dorsal ventral for the peripheral nervous system structures.
You said the majority of hospitals in the real world use the terminology you use.
It just depends on where you go.
Okay.
So personal preferences. A lot of authors will do the change, some won't. Whatever makes you happy. So just try not to get too crazy confused about that because I won't be using the word dorsal gray horn or dorsal white column. I'll say posterior instead. And of course, we can see all those structures. There's nobody to cross out on our model. Figure 19.4 are showing those descending and ascending tracks that we talked about in lecture. With those, we're just dealing with those in lecture. We're not going to deal with them in lab. So you can ignore 19.4. We're not going to talk about the tracks for lab purposes. 19.5 is a slide of a spinal cord. I'm not going to show you slides because we're done with microscopes. So you can ignore that one. Figure 19.6 is showing you the plexuses, which we will use our green guide to show you. So that's picture A on 19.6, the cervical plexus, brachial plexus, lumbar plexus, sacral plexus. Picture B you can ignore. We're not going to look at that one. Okay. Now, the rest of the book will go through the details of the different plexuses, the different nerves in each plexus, what muscles they go to, all that kind of fun stuff. We will do that detail stuff for lecture. Okay, so we'll be talking about the median nerve or the sciatic nerve or whatever in the lecture setting, but we're not going to concern ourselves for that in lab. So everything past 19.6 you can completely ignore. Okay, So we have to be able to identify the cervical plexus, but you don't have to know the individual nerves of the cervical plexus for lab purposes.
Was there any any of the plexuses we didn't need to know?
Okay, what?
Was there any of the plexuses we didn't need to know?
Nope, we gotta know it all.
Okay, thoracic and the
It's nothing.
quadrilateral. Gotcha.
We are skipping exercise 20, okay, the autonomic nervous system. That way no one has to go around and do exercise. And then exercise 21 are the human reflexes. So figure 21.1 shows you the parts of the reflex arc, which we can see on our cross-section of the spinal cord model. So we can see all those different parts to it. Figure 21.2, which is on page 331, shows you the difference between the monosynaptic and the polysynaptic reflex. So we'll be talking about the reflexes today in lecture. Again, this is a nice picture if you want a visual representation, a picture to look at while you're studying your lecture notes. But we're not going to deal with polysynaptic versus monosynaptic in lab. So you can ignore 12.2 or 21.2. Now, when it comes to the reflexes, this chapter goes through several different types of testing and several different types of reflexes. We're only going to be responsible for 5. So the first 2 reflexes are on the board because they're not in your lab book. So when we have the reflexes, we have to know the reflex and how to test for that reflex. We need to know what do we expect to see, what kind of response are we going to have, and we need to know the muscles that are going to do that response. So that's how I have the first 2 set up for you. So we do have little hammers if you want to test your reflexes. It's not required for you to beat each other with little hammers unless you want to. Okay. If you don't want to, you don't have to. So our first reflex is our biceps reflex. So you would have the person that you were testing, your patient, would bend their elbow roughly 90 degrees and lay their forearm flat on the table. And the person that's doing the testing would put their thumb over the tendon of the biceps brachii muscle. Then they would use their hammer to hit their thumb. And what you would expect would be either a forearm flexion or a biceps twitch. So biceps brachii twitch. And the muscles involved in that, of course, would be the biceps brachii. Now, if we were to test for the triceps reflex, we would lay on the table, which I'm not going to do for you. Okay? But the patient would lay on the table. They would bend their elbow at 90 degrees, put their forearm on their tummy, and the person testing the reflexes would come and hit the tendon right above the elbow. And they would expect that they would have forearm extension or a triceps twitch. Okay? And of course, the muscles that's going to do that is going to be the triceps brachii. Okay? So it's a nice thing we already know what these muscles are and everything they do, right?
Yes.
Yeah, kind of like what was on practical 3. Okay. Our next reflex that you'll need to know is the patellar reflex or knee jerk reflex. So that's figure 21.3, gives you the illustration of that reflex. And figure 21.4 shows you how to test for that reflex. Now, you can keep your pants on. No one has to put on little paper dresses to do these reflexes. They're just showing you patience. But what you would do is you would have your patient or the person you're testing would sit on a chair or on a table with their knees bent and their feet kind of dangling. And of course, when your knee is bent, your hamstrings are contracted and your quads are stretched because your knee is bent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, because the guy that tells you to bend the knee is the hamstring group. We just learned that. So to do the testing when they're in that seated position, the doctor's holding the foot down in case the guy wants to knee him or something, but it's not like you have to wrestle them down like a calf or something. But you would take the little hammer and you would hit them on the patellar ligament. Okay, so right below the patella, you would hit that ligament. And that's going to cause the quadriceps femoris to twitch or contract. And when our quadriceps femoris contract, what movement is that going to give us?
An abduction, like oh wait, I know.
Extension of the knee.
Extension of the knee. Okay, so hamstrings bend the knee, flex the knee. Your quads are going to extend the knee. So our response would be extension of the knee. You can say leg, interchangeable. or that quadriceps twitch, and the muscle group that is going to extend the knee is going to be the quadriceps femoris. Okay. Our next reflex that we're going to look at is the calcaneal tendon reflex, or the knee jerk ankle jerk reflex. That's at number 5 there. And how to test for it is figure 21.5. So you would have your patient sitting there without their shoes and socks on. A little guy looks like he has a shave line at where his socks are located. A little weird. But you would have the doctor would hold the patient's foot with their leg kind of stretched a little bit, and you're going to hit their calcaneal tendons, what's called the calcaneal tendon reflex, with the little hammer. Now, if we were to hit the calcaneal tendon, what muscle do you think is going to respond?
The gastrocnemius?
Gastrocnemius, right? Because that's what the gastrocnemius is attached to, is that calcaneal tendon. When the gastrocnemius contracts, what movement does that cause?
Plantar
Flexion.
flexion.
Okay, point your toes. Okay, that's something we might have learned on our practical 3. What are the 3 muscles that cause plantar flexion?
Gastrocnemius, the soleus, and the, I don't remember the last one.
Peroneus.
Yeah,
Okay.
peroneus.
So that's why we needed to know what they did, because now we're applying what we've learned. Oh my gosh, it's like we have to put everything together. It's horrible. Okay, so we would have how to test for it. We would have the reflex would be our plantar flexion, or the toes would point, or we would have slight twitching of our gastrocnemius, and the muscle involved would be the gastrocnemius. The cross extension reflex we're skipping because that could cause an injury if you push wrong. We're going to have our final reflex is the plantar reflex. So that's under superficial reflexes on page 333. So how to test for the plantar reflex, figure 21.6 shows you that. So you would have your patient laying down on the surface with their foot exposed, and you don't have to, that guy looks like he's got a vice grip, like he's been wrestling cattle all day or something. It's like, I guess his patient's going to kick him in the face or something. But you don't have to hold them down so drastically. But you would take the pointy end of your little hammer and scrape up. What happens when somebody tickles the bottom of your feet?
Your foot, your toes.
Okay, what do your toes do?
They flex.
They flex, they curl. So toe curling is toe flexing. So our response for doing the plantar reflex, we would expect to have toe flexing. So that would be our response. And what muscle do you think is going to do toe flexing?
The extensor digitorum, or the
Not the extensor.
longum.
Who's going to flex?
Flexor digitorum.
Flexor digitorum longus. Because again, the extensor digitorum extends, the flexor digitorum flexes. We didn't have to know that muscle yesterday, because it's a deep muscle, so we couldn't see it. But the flexor digitorum longus is going to curl your toes, is going to flex your toes. Okay, so that would be the muscle group that would be involved, and of course the response would be the flexion of the toes, curling of the toes, and then the setup there. Now with the plantar reflex, that's the only one where it discusses what happens if you don't do the reflex properly. Instead of toe curling, if your toes flare, that's called Babinski sign. Okay, that's an indication that you have neurological damage or your baby. Okay, so we'll talk more about this in lecture. So if we don't initiate or don't have a proper plantar reflex, that's known as Babinski sign. So usually they're going to start checking for brain damage, for spinal cord damage, issues within the body. Okay. So those are the only reflexes we're doing, and that's because there's other reflexes, but some of them are a little creepy, like the corneal reflex, where you gently touch a subject's cornea with a piece of cotton. Yeah, no one's going to gently touch my eyeball. It's not that I don't trust you, but creepies. One of them is, initiate the gag reflex. What could go wrong? Like, they don't clean these rooms. We don't want to test the gag reflex. So we only care about those 5. If it was me, I would just keep making this table. So you've already got this set up. So I would just go through number 3, the knee jerk reflex. Number 4, the calcaneal reflex. Number 5, the plantar reflex. and I would list out how to test for them. I would list out the responses and the muscles initiated or involved in those responses. And then you don't have to look at this chapter anymore. You don't have to do the reading because everything's in a nice chart form for you to memorize. That's what I did with me. Okay. Any question about lab book content? So there are 3 models that we are going to use for exercise 15, 19, and 21. We've got our neuron model. We actually have several of them up there, so you don't have to share those too much. We have the cross-section of the spinal cord model. We have other versions. I just like that one. It's my favorite one because it's colored pretty. And then we've got the dude. Okay, so those are the 3 models that would be covering the content that we're doing or working with right now. On Monday, we will have bonus quiz 10 over these 3 models and your nervous tissue and your spinal cord, spinal nervous list would be due for bonus points. And the nice thing is those lists, a lot of that stuff is on your test 4 because we're kind of overlapping again. So it's one of those, filling those out can be helpful in preparing for the test this weekend. So those will be on Monday. And then the quiz 10 over this stuff will be on Tuesday. We'll be moving on to the brain, and then brain stuff, and then practical, and then done. Woo. Are we excited? The end is very near. We just got 2 weeks left. Kind of crazy. I know. Don't cry. Don't be sad. You'll miss me. You can always take me for A&P too. Just saying. So here's pictures of our dead guys to the A&aP1 table. So this is Victor and his nervous tissue. So we can see the spinal cord here. Let me get it a little darker. I like to pretend it helps with being able to see the picture, even though it's the world's tiniest picture there. So when we look at, we've got the spinal cord going all the way down. Here's that last little bit of the spinal cord, that conus medullaris, so it kind of goes into that cone shape. And past the conus medullaris, you're going to have the cauda equina, so it kind of looks like a horse's tail or a ponytail popping out from there, kind of like when you wear a ponytail. When we look at the different plexuses, we've got the cervical plexus up here, and we can actually see the nerves that are the phrenic nerves going down to the diaphragm. We'll be talking about the plexuses more today in class. Here we have the brachial plexus going to the upper limbs, the lumbar plexus going to your thighs, and then the sacral plexus that's going to go all the way down to your toes, including your big old sciatic nerve. Okay. So here's just colored. So the red ones, kind of hard to see, but they're there. That's the cervical plexus. And then we've got the brachial plexus, lumbar plexus, sacral plexus. So this one's just color coded for your viewing pleasure. Any questions? All right, these are those dermatomes, and that chick, it's like looking at Elastigirl. Like she's got huge hips. Those stripes are not very becoming for her. But anywho, we talked about the dermatomes in lecture. So these are those different fields that are covered by the different nerves. So L3 would be right here. So if we had shingles that was affecting L4, we would expect blisters all along this area, that kind of scenario. Here's our side shot showing you the nervous tissue. So we can do, it does follow the curves of the spinal column, obviously. So we've got the cervical plexus, the brachial plexus, lumbar plexus, sacral plexus. We can see the conus medullaris right here, little triangle guy, and that cauda equina, all that horsey tail looking stuff past that point. The filum terminalis is kind of hard to see, but it is a little bitty tiny film coming down the middle there. Okay. And the brain is next week. Give you something to look forward to.
Sweet.
Ooh, exciting. Pretend you're excited. Yes. Thank you. Don't need more caffeine. Big bad hairy questions?
Can you go over it one more time?
Which picture? All? Sure.
Sure.
Okay. Everything you've said since the beginning. I've been talking for 30 minutes. So cervical plexus, we can actually see the phrenic nerve right here going down to the diaphragm. Keeps you alive. then the brachial plexus, and then lumbar plexus, and sacral plexus. Spinal cord, conus medullaris, cauda equina, and the filum terminale. Big got here, question? Time is yours to study the models, become one with, love one, all that kind of fun stuff. Until it's time to go to the lab and talk about plexuses and reflexes and all the same stuff.
Reflexes.
Oh, they got some of the same stuff. They love nothing wrong. And those two, there's only one of each of those. There's other versions of the models.
Snap a picture.
Here, do you want this one?
Axon HELOC is one. And I think the HELOC is. That's the axon HELOC. Axon HELOC. Nucleus of the soma. Nucleus. Nasal body. Nasal bodies. Neurofibrils. Black lines.
neurofibrils, synaptic knob, synaptic terminal, synaptic knob, synaptic terminal, synaptic knob. Dendrite 14. So dendrites. 14 dendrites. The axon 6, which is this, I thought. 6. This is the axon. This is the myelin sheath. Let's see. 7 is the nucleus of the Schwann cell. 8 is the neurolemma. Nodes of Ranvier or Ranier. Nodes of Ranier. Nodes of Ranier. Nodes of Ranier. 10 is mitochondrion. Little squigglies of the mitochondrion. Myelin sheath is 11. Yes, okay, so this is the myelin sheath. And the endoneurium is 12, which I'm not quite sure where 12 is. Endoneurium. That's all, folks. One more time, I'll go. Axon, HELOC, nucleus, neurofibril. If you can see, there's some little black lines right there. Nasal bodies. These little are the nasal bodies. Nasal bodies. Okay. Synaptic knob. Not gonna act like I know what that is, but I think it's this whole thing. Okay. The dendrites. The way I was taught in psychology. Dendrites. Cell body. Axon.
These are just the synaptic knobs, so other neurons talking to this neuron.
Okay.
The little pink,
Synaptic knobs.
the little pink
You have
knobbies,
these little
the little bendy.
orangey-
Oh, okay. Now I know. Synaptic knobs. Synaptic knobs. Synaptic knobs. Okay. And the axon is this whole area. Okay. Nucleus of the Schwann cell. The neurolemma is this outer covering. The nodes of Ranier or Ranvier from nodes of Ranvier. Yes. The mitochondrion over here. The myelin sheath is here. The layers of myelin sheath. The sheathing that covers the axon and protects it. Also boosts electrical signals. Myelin sheath, endoneurium. This gray stuff here. Okay. Can I ask? Let me see. Nodes of Ranier. Ranvier. See notes. Schwann cells are in the myelin sheath. Is it safe to say that?
Schwann cells make the myelin sheath.
Schwann cells make up the myelin sheath. I stand corrected.
So the notes are the
No, I took a picture, but thank you.
Okay. Nodes of Ranier are the dents. Oh, okay. The nodes of Ranier are the dents, Bray. Okay. That's done. Let's see if I can find. Classical cover. She just left. To clarify, did you say we need to know like the cervical nerves, the thoracic nerves, lumbar nerves, those areas, those regions?
The plexuses are more important than the individual nerves,
10-4.
but the cervical nerves are just those popping out of the cervical region.
Okay.